that is, I mean, it really is a statement on how deeply we must feel the fear of losing momentum. I mean, fundamentally, I think that's what it was within me. It was, you know, I feared slowing down and giving up the momentum that I had built and the credibility that I had built, the reputation that I had built for being the person that could just get it done, that could just power through. I feared losing that more than I feared the seriousness of the symptoms that I was feeling. And wow, what a dark and masterful charade that is that our mind, plays on ourselves. Because there's no doubt now in my mind that the only thing to, I guess, fear to a certain degree is sort of that degree of disassociation with your body. Nothing else should even compare to that. And, you know, slowing down to protect yourself, to realign with yourself is, I think, one of the greatest acts of bravery that one can sort of embark on. And it can be very disconcerting, but it is ultimately the only reasonable strategy. Like everything else is actually illogical because it is just kicking the can, down the line.
Hey guys, before we get started, I have one quick favor to ask of you. Can you please hit the subscribe button so that more people can find the show? Thank you. Sabra, welcome. To give yourself some leeway. It was so funny how this came about when you reached out on LinkedIn, and this person is really resonating a lot with what I talk about in burnout. I was like, oh, check out snackable growth. And I was like, oh, cool. And then I checked out the How to Feed Your Soul. And next thing I was like, a lot of this is resonating a lot. This would be a great guest on the podcast. I'm going to reach out and ask them to be a guest. And then I looked at my Google Forms and I was like, oh, there, you're already in the Google Form list. So you'd already done your research and found me out too. So I love that we can make this happen.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. And I was so eager when I stumbled on your podcast because I think these are the messages that really need to be amplified. So I'm glad we found each other.
Awesome. Sabra, so you come from a more kind of fintech corporate background. What was your experience with burnout from a fintech background?
Yeah, so I spent many years working in fintech, and I was out in the San Francisco Bay Area, so really the hub of all of the sort of urgent tech energy. And my experience with burnout, stemmed from the fact that I was working in a very fast-paced company. We were growing very, very rapidly, and the nature of fintech and specifically payments is that a lot of the urgency in the industry is not artificial. It's actually very, very real and very understandable and has very concrete impact. So, for example, if something breaks in a payment flow in the middle of the night, that means that our business or our customers are losing money by the minute. So this is very, very impactful to could be to merchants, could be to consumers, and so oftentimes I kind of found myself working very intensely to try to fix these issues, and that was a big part of my job. And there were many elements of it that I loved, but it also did require a lot of urgency and a lot of readiness to hop on fires. And over time, it did kind of lead to my burnout, though I had to dig into the details of what was really causing that. But that is the starting point.
And you say there, let's say you have a break in the payment flow or something like that. Is it that you're constantly monitoring, let's say, the automated systems? Is it more, let's say, tech related, or is it that there's not the organizational systems in place so that you don't see the early warning signs, or does it just happen like that?
Yeah, so this was really tech related. So fundamentally has to do with the infrastructure. So as a consumer or a buyer, you can think about all of the experiences that you don't worry about. You just think that they work. When you go online and you go to united.com and you buy your airline ticket, of course you'll just enter, you'll enter your card number and you'll hit pay and you just assume everything works fine. Or, you go to walmart.com and you add things to your cart and you hit checkout and you assume everything goes through fine. On the back end, those are actually very, very complex payment flows in order to get the money to the merchant, in order to make sure that if there's any cross-border money movement, that conversion is done effectively, like currency conversion. But there are a lot of sort of hops in the system, which means that there are a lot of opportunities for things to break. And so, payments is so fundamental to how the world works, like to e-commerce. And I love the fact that it has enabled so much online commerce. But it does take a lot of work and diligence to make sure that that infrastructure is robust.
So, like, what was it for you? Where was it the realization moment that you had burnt out or that something wasn't right?
Yeah, for me, I'd say that it was creeping up slowly, and then And then it was a combination of being in the middle of COVID quarantine and working on a very intense sort of project at the time that I really came to terms with what I was feeling and put a name to it as burnout. And um, I think burnout gets thrown around a lot as a word, but I think it can mean different things to different people. And so for me, that burnout when I was working on this pretty intense project was a combination of just exhaustion. Like I was tired at operating at these really sort of intense levels for a long time. I was tired of working a lot of hours, admittedly in something that I strongly believed in. So, this wasn't like this was no one's evil doing. This was me wanting in my core to fix something. Um, but recognizing that exhaustion and then even going a layer deeper to realize that that exhaustion was fueled by my own sort of appetite to overwork was a realization that only came, I think, when I hit that breaking point of just feeling the physical symptoms of it, which was literally just insomnia, you know, insomnia in spite of my acute fatigue, which is a very weird thing to experience. You're so tired and yet you can't sleep at night. And then other sort of darker physiological side effects, like literally losing my hair, and literally having awful headaches every single night and just thinking that that was okay or normal. And it was only because it got to the breaking point where it was so acute that it was loud enough for me to take it seriously.
Yeah, I love that where you said it, where it got loud enough that you took it seriously. It's like your body is always giving you like alarm signals, and you just choose to keep on overriding them. For me, it was the same. It was like my body was literally shutting down, and I was breaking out in ulcers and hives and everything. And I'm like, okay, there must be an antihistamine cream I can take for this. Okay, there must be some steroid cream or something that I can take for this. Oh, I'm feeling tired all the time. Okay, I just need more caffeine. Okay, I need to find out if caffeine's not working, what like synergizes with caffeine and makes it more effective. Okay, let's look up those things rather than being like your body is literally screaming at you right now and it's going to keep on screaming at you until, as you said, it gets loud enough that you start to listen, or it's going to just completely shut down and not let you do anymore because you're trying to override everything. So it's like how long does your body have to scream at you before you listen determines how low your rock bottom is going to be, or how low your breaking point will be.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and I think that that characterizes a lot of people's experiences where, if I were to even confront my this version of myself from a couple years ago when I was in the pits of my burnout, if I was to confront that version of myself and say, "Hey, Sabra, you're really burnt out. You are numbing yourself to these symptoms and you're not addressing the root cause." I don't even know that it would have really sunk in. It had to come from within myself to feel it so deeply to the point of being unable to ignore it. But that is what it was. It was just a constant exercise in distracting myself, with these sort of numbing tactics, and I think that looks different for different people. For me, it was just at the end of a long day. It could be at 11 p.m., just flopping on the couch and like turning on Netflix. On the weekends, it would just be doing anything to get my mind off of the sort of exhaustion of my work week and the discomfort I had about going into the next one. And during the week, it was literally popping Advil to make my headache go away, and just living in a perpetual state of pain. Um, and 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 I wish I had taken the time earlier to really ask myself uncomfortably, what is the root cause? The root cause is not even the overworking. It's something deeper.
I even knew people who had the preventative paracetamol that in case they have a headache later, they would take it now to avoid the headache later, just in case they have one. And for me, that was crazy to even think of. You're trying to alleviate a symptom that you don't have right now. You want to prevent it from happening later by taking the paracetamol or Advil or anything right now. And I found that crazy, and that rather than listening to the body signals that your body was giving you for so long, you're not even you're taking like a preemptive move to avoid feeling it later, just in case your body is screaming at you later. Which I always found fascinating, that people would ignore their body signals for so long that they just see it as a nuisance.
Yeah, yeah, that is, I mean, it really is a statement on how deeply we must feel the fear of losing momentum. I mean, fundamentally, I think that's what it was within me. It was, you know, I feared slowing down and giving up the momentum that I had built and the credibility that I had built, the reputation that I had built for being the person that could just get it done, that could just power through. I feared losing that more than I feared the seriousness of the symptoms that I was feeling. And wow, what a dark and masterful charade that is, that our mind, plays on ourselves. Because there's no doubt now in my mind that the only thing to, I guess, fear to a certain degree is sort of that degree of disassociation with your body. Nothing else should even compare to that. And you know, slowing down to protect yourself, to realign with yourself, is, I think, one of the greatest acts of bravery that one can sort of embark on, and it can be very disconcerting, but it is ultimately the only reasonable strategy. Like everything else is actually illogical because it is just kicking the can, down the line. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, that conditioning that you mentioned as well. It's like you say, oh, the how masterful the mind is at playing these tricks on us. But I feel it's how we're conditioned from a young age through school, getting your first job, and it's like, oh no, you need to be productive all the time. You need to be showing up 100%, 100% of the time. And if you're not, then you're lazy or you're not productive. You're going to be pulled into a performance review, and all of these things are like stacked against you. And you feel like, oh, I can't reach out for help because I'll be pulled into a performance review. They'll say that it's my responsibility to take care of my health. They'll say that, oh, well, if you're feeling so tired all the time, maybe you should take your weekends more seriously and actually recover on your time off. Maybe you need to get to bed earlier. You need to be more responsible when you're not in the office. And it's like you're supposed to um, balance your life and your time outside of the office so that you can perform better at the office. While there is a bit of responsibility in that, of course, it's if people have that fear that if they don't put all of their effort in their free time to make themselves perform at their peak when they are at work, then they feel they're a failure. And that's where you have the likes of taking the Advil or taking sleeping aids so that they get some sleep at night, or taking caffeine pills during the day as well so that they can get through the day, so they don't look unproductive, they don't look lazy, or they don't look like they're slacking off at work. That they're always showing up, they're high spirited, high energy all the time. That's what takes the biggest toll, where people feel they can't take a step back, they can't take a breath. And even as a result of that, by not being able to take that step back and ground themselves, then they're not operating at their best. If you're absolutely wired all the time, you're not going to be making the best executive decisions.
I certainly believe that. I now believe that in my bones, that taking a step back and also communicating transparently with the people that you're working with on where you're at is very much a sign of true executive leadership. And I think that, certain corporate environments will be more mature than others. And I think it's the ones that are immature that will not respond well to that, which is very unfortunate. I think there are still many companies that are just not equipped with the right leadership in order to be able to receive people that are experiencing these things and load balance their organizations in a way that addresses and retains employees and helps keep a sort of happy and healthy workforce. And I was lucky enough to be at a place that was extremely supportive, that had very mature leadership, that you know respected and valued the sort of the way that I was feeling when I finally did decide to come forward and and share that I was overwhelmed. But I know that that's not the case that everyone is in, and I think that it can be very scary for you if you're in kind of the former case of a less healthy work environment. It can be very scary to approach your boss or your leadership and say, look, this is the stack rank of priorities for my life right now. Whether or not you say it that explicitly is another matter, but and to share what is and isn't working can be a really difficult conversation, and it can be received the wrong way. But ultimately, I think it comes down to asking yourself what the alternative is. Like if the alternative is to continue suffering in perpetuity at a company, that isn't actually a alternative. Um, but but these are not easy discussions to have.
That's the yes, it's first the fear of that conversation, and if how it's going to be tolerated, or how it's going to be handled, depending on the training or the experience that that manager has. Also, um, they might be familiar with company policy, but oftentimes we see someone says it to their manager, and their manager says, well, that's easy for you to say, you only have to do A, B, and C, I have to manage the whole team. And they take it personally, rather than showing up as a leader and really being there to help their team, to facilitate them through what they're experiencing, and really helping to serve them so that they can serve the company as a whole. And it's uh, difficult, I feel, for a lot of people to open up when they're the stories that they hear in the workplace. You were very fortunate in your experience compared to the a lot of horror stories I've heard, and I've even heard like well company policies when it comes to mental health leave. Some saying, oh, take 2 or 3 weeks, and others saying take up to 2 years. And understanding, well, what is the best in the employee's interest when it comes to taking mental health leave. For my experience, I was given 4 weeks. And because I wasn't given any direction on how to take care of myself when I burnt out, that 4 weeks was enough, because it was 4 weeks for me to do all the wrong things and absolutely exhaust myself because I was trying to speed run through everything. Whereas what I needed was small, simple steps over a longer period of time, without the fear of losing my job, without while still having the job security, and not feeling like, oh, if I'm out of the office for too long, they must be replacing me, and having all of this narrative in the back of my head. I feel that some people, when they take an extra long period of leave, they find it more difficult to get back into the workplace. So unless there's a system in place for them to recover, or to show up better, and to help to not only recover from their burnout or exhaustion, but build a system to help themselves level up and show up better when they return, then it's counterproductive to offer someone an extended period of leave, unless there's medical reasons, of course.
Yeah, I think that is an important point to make. And I think that depending on the company, it could be a very valid concern that if you're gone for a long time, things move fast, companies change. It's in many ways it isn't personal. It's just the nature of business that your role may change and their needs may change. And so I do think it's an understandable concern that people have in terms of job security. I think you're I agree with the point that you're hitting on, and maybe it comes out to there needing to be sort of a combination. Like, when one hits burnout, I do think that just time off, whatever that is, I personally think that 4 weeks is the absolute minimum of what I would have needed. Um, I took multiple leaves of absences, which were 3 months each, and I think that part of it is you need just that pure time to step away, to recenter, to make yourself present, to stop constantly like thinking about the future, which is the nature of work. It's a constant exercise in future proofing the next problem. And so I think you need that segment of time. And then I think what you also need, as you mentioned, is just a really clear perspective on what needs to change to make your life better and more sustainably. And so in some cases, I don't think that companies are out to intentionally overload their employees. I think it's just that organizations are a collective of individuals, and those individuals tend to mainly be thinking about themselves and their own problems, and they just don't have the headspace to think about what would relieve your problems. But I also think that the average individual is kind and is keen to relieve other people's troubles if they have clarity on what it takes to do that. And so, I mean, one of the approaches that I took was just coming in with a very clear perspective on what would have to change to better support me. And that, the way that comes out, it sounds like aggressive, but it didn't really need to be. It was just kind of a discussion around like, here's the current state of the world. At this rate, it's just not going to be sustainable for me. And here's the state of the world that I want to get to. And here's what I think getting there looks like. It means dropping XYZ. It means us perhaps, hiring another person in this function that should really be taking on that shape of work anyway as the business grows. So coming in with a clear perspective, I think is helpful when you're trying to navigate how this sort of contends with the real challenges of running a business.
Yes, and what you're striking on there is a lot of where people have they blame the company, they blame the boss for their burnout, they blame everything around them, but they don't know how to see change. They just want everyone to come in and be their savior and fix it for them. Where what they need to do is take that step back. Yes, having the leave is a good time to have time to catch your breath and reflect on yourself. And as you said, understanding that it's the system the systems that you have need to change. Not the system needs to change. The company needs to change to accommodate your needs. It's okay. Not everyone is burning out, so the system is working for some people. But it's not working for others. And it's about understanding, okay, well, then what needs to change for it to work for everyone? How can we optimize that system? It might the system that's in place might work optimally for some people, but not for others. How can we, let's say, compromise, or how can we optimize it in a way that people can have space to grow, have space to move around, maybe try different roles. Maybe the role that they've been in for the past 10 years no longer meets their needs, or the time commitment no longer meets their needs, and they might need to step into another role. Might be the same time commitment, but it might just be less draining. Maybe it's just a change in how they think and perceive things. They might have 10 years of experience in one area, and that could help them have a clearer perspective on how another area of the business works. Being Rather than coming from it from blame and pointing fingers game of like, oh, you're the reason why I burnt out. You're the reason why I can't work here anymore. It's coming up with the, as you said, the creative, the solution oriented way of saying, look, the way things are right now are not working for me. Can we try A, B, C? Coming with options rather than just looking for someone to step in and take away all your issues or take away all your problems is it's, I think it's the only way forward. From my opinion, that's the only way forward I can see. But when you're in that state of exhaustion, you're not in the right mindset to be able to come up with any of those solutions. So yes, I think there's a balance of trying to find a sweet spot by taking a step back for long enough that you can ground yourself and recollect yourself and even understand where your values are at right now. Because for me, it was like trying to understand my values. My values changed a lot in the 10 years I was in my career. The values I had at 20 years old were very different from 30 years old. And understanding that when I started that role at 20 was a lot different to where I was at 30. So, what I expected from my career, how I've evolved in my career, the goals were a lot different. I think people need to reevaluate in more frequent timeframes than every 10 years.
Absolutely. And I love the anchoring on values that you just kind of called out because when we think about I guess it's just it doesn't feel like it's that often that we really sit and noodle on our values. We think about it in the abstract. You know, we think about it in very lofty terms when somebody asks us what we value, and we all throw out the same answers. We all say family, we all say friends, we say community, we say, you know, we say all of the good, the right answers, the right human answers. But when we take those values and we actually map them to how our time is spent, that was another major illuminating factor for me in sort of seeing that my values did not at all match up with what I would describe as my priorities, which is really how you sort of allocate time to your values. And and I do think that it takes time away from work in some cases to give yourself the clarity of headspace to do that audit on how your time is spent and sort of reset where you want your time to go and to make sure that it's actually honoring your values. Um, and I think the other element that I really liked that you hit on was just around the whole idea um, of deeply reflecting on what the things are that energize you and what the things are that don't. Because I do think that a lot of burnouts can also be driven by this sense of like under fulfillment. And so you're just sort of overworking to keep pushing the ball forward in a way to kind of again numb yourself to the deeper questions of what you actually want. Like you don't really know what you want, so you're like, "Oh, well, we'll just keep making money and like keep climbing, you know, keep climbing up because, you know, surely I won't regret that in the future." But when I took some time to actually reflect on like what's important to me, what type of work brings me joy, what are the things that I know that I dread doing each week, that only helped again give like my leaders and my teammates clarity on what I need to be best supported and what I need to actually be here for the long haul, which is what I wanted in my core. I wanted to be there for the long haul. Um, I just needed I needed the weighting of responsibilities to shift towards more of what I was energized by. And there will always be pieces that you're not energized by. Everybody has that to a certain degree. But you want it to be mostly weighted in the right direction.
Hey, it's Eugene, and I want to share this milestone with Give Yourself Some Leeway. So in 2025, the podcast has surpassed 150 episodes. We've created a safe space for high achievers to be vulnerable, to share their experience with stress, overwhelm, and burnout, and help others in the process. And while I'm celebrating this milestone, I still feel like I've missed the mark. You see, people tune into every episode. They listen to every conversation, but they still tell me that they're lost, stuck in a rut, unsure of where to go next. And I totally get that. I mean, I used to listen to 8, maybe 10 hours of podcasts every day, but still not take any action to move the needle. You see, if you change nothing, then nothing changes. So if you want to break the burnout cycle and you don't know what the first step is, let me help you out. If you take 5 minutes today and answer a few questions, I can send you a personalized roadmap on how to break the burnout cycle and start beating burnout today. And if you say to yourself, oh, I don't have 5 minutes to take out of my day, I've got way too much to do, I'm overwhelmed as it is, I've got too many priorities, I've been there. Just ask yourself, how can I take care of others if I don't know how I'm showing up for myself? You deserve to give yourself that leeway. You deserve to give yourself 5 minutes to see where you stand. So click the link below and I'll send that report straight to your inbox today. Distinction between hero syndrome and imposter syndrome. So how would you distinguish them, and how do you think people confuse hero syndrome with imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so I think imposter syndrome is talked about a lot. I think it's almost become like a buzzword that people latch onto. And and I think that I certainly felt elements of imposter syndrome, which at its core I would say is the feeling that you don't quite belong or that you're not quite good enough to make it in a certain space, and uh, that you feel unworthy, even if all evidence suggests otherwise. You know, you could feel unworthy because of, in some cases, demographic issues where you just feel different. It could be because of, you know, doubt in your fundamental abilities, but the core of it is that you don't feel you belong. Hence, you're an imposter. Um, I felt elements of that from the perspective of I was surrounded by a lot of incredibly smart people. And when I looked around, I couldn't help but feel as though it would take every ounce of me and more to feel that I was smart enough to keep up. Um, and and yet and yet it didn't feel as though imposter syndrome fully hit the mark because I did have self-esteem. I had self-esteem and self-doubt, and that's like a weird paradox. You know, I did think I was fundamentally worthy. I mean, I have parents that love me. I grew up in a relatively comfortable and safe environment, all very fundamental things that I think ingrain in you some degree of self-worth. So so it felt like that term wasn't quite hitting the nail on the head for what I was fully feeling. And I don't know where I stumbled across the phrase hero syndrome, um, but it's certainly not talked about enough. And I don't know if it has a universal definition, but my definition is that hero syndrome is where you do fundamentally feel worthy. You do have self-esteem, but you have lived a life that has consistently performed at high levels that now you doubt your ability to keep that up. And you fear the fall from grace should you slow down and should you do anything to reveal the fact that you're not actually a hero and that you can't be a hero all the time. So I tend to describe hero syndrome as the core trait of quote unquote insecure overachievers. These sort of high performing but also high functioning anxiety individuals that um, that believe anything short of excellence is actually, you know, mediocrity. And mediocrity is like terrifying for some reason. And so I think I had both elements of imposter syndrome and hero syndrome, though I do think they get conflated.
Yeah, it just reminded me of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight when Batman says like you either die a hero or live long enough to become a villain. And that for me is hero syndrome in a nutshell, where people are like afraid of the facade breaking, or afraid of, oh, what if I get found out? And for me, that was a lot of it as well. I was always striving for achievement. always want to be seen as always being busy, always being hyper productive. No one can work as hard as me, keeping that facade as much as possible, both at work and outside of work. And then the feeling of even in my when I'm sitting at home alone on the couch, that I feel uh, the laziness creeping in and being like, oh, you can't sit here. I get restless then being like, oh, I feel bad that I sat here for an hour just doom scrolling, when my body is like, you need to take a break. And me not feeling comfortable with sitting with myself or sitting in silence or being alone with my thoughts. I need to be doing something, I need to be productive, I need to be achieving something. And that was a big shift for me, that being productive all the time is not seen as a good thing. That there is power in being able to say, I can take a few hours to myself at the weekend. I can spend a few hours off my phone, away from social media, away from work emails, with my family or with my friends at the weekend or on a weekday. Or I can take an extended vacation and not have to worry about my work emails. Uh, that those were seen as the bigger flexes. That if you're able to take time away from those things, they are also success signals. They're key metrics in success. And that was the bigger shift for me on the other side of burnout. That rather than trying to be hyper productive all the time, it was, how can I set up a life and leverage systems in a way that I can afford to take those moments away, that I still have security, safety, success, and fulfillment without working 24/7.
Yes, yes. I love that reframe because I think, what you're describing feels like it is such an intimate part of hero syndrome, and that is the guilty conscience. You just feel this tremendous guilt about not doing enough. And so it's midnight, but you still check your email just because, or you'll just push yourself a couple more hours on a Sunday evening just to tee up the work week. It's those micro decisions that are actually rooted in this guilty conscience of not doing enough and this fear of what might happen if you don't do enough, or this fear of sort of missed opportunity if you don't do enough, that is, I think, core to the nature of hero syndrome. And I think that reframe around what is success to you is so important. And it takes a lot to sort of sit down and get yourself to just be uncomfortable long enough to try it. I think that's where people end up sort of missing out is we're even too fearful to give it a try. For 2 weeks and just say, for 2 weeks, I'm not going to work at all on the weekends. And for 2 weeks, I am not going to check a single email after 6 p.m. or whatever it is. And they seem like small, silly things. And yet, if you're somebody that is truly struggling with burnout, it's unfathomable to you. It feels deeply uncomfortable. It becomes like a nervous tick to just check your email and just reply to a quick Slack ping. And yet, over time, I think what you find when you start to make those little decisions and to truly reframe success in your mind and true sort of, um, to a certain degree, like executive poise, you start to find that it just becomes easier. You start to sort of break down some of the big, scary mystery of what will happen if you just pull back a little bit to give yourself peace. And that, I think, starts to lay the groundwork for you to do that even more and to build out just a more thoughtful approach in how you manage your time. So I love that reframe and the focus on just taking small steps in the right direction.
Yeah, because if those small steps in the right direction, when everyone is chasing the quick fixes, it's the small, consistent steps over a longer period of time that actually help so much more. The compound effect. For me, I was all for when I first burnt out. I was chasing the quick fixes. How do I get rid of this feeling in 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks max, so that I can go back to feeling normal and go back to my old routine, when it was my old routine that caused me to feel this way in the first place. And in self reflection, realizing if I don't want to feel this way anymore, I'm going to have to change who I am. I'm going to have to become more. I'm going to have to become something different if I don't want to feel like this. And it was, okay, what are the things that are holding me back, or what are the things that are not, that are no longer serving me? And it was, um, uh, when it comes to changing those small things, it's like swapping out one thing for another and hoping that it works, or let's say trial and error, trying something different for a change. One big thing for me was I used to do a lot of running before I burnt out. I used to run a lot, go for long runs every evening after work, and say, "Oh, it's for my health. It's so that I can have more energy when it comes to work." But it became like I was chasing the runner's high because I did not want to deal with the negative emotions I had. I didn't want to deal with all of the frustrations and instead just throw on some heavy metal and go for a 30-minute run and just sprint and then have that sense of accomplishment that, oh, okay, I got a new time record. Oh, I ran for longer without taking any breaks, and reaching all of these productivity or success metrics in a way of saying, oh, I'm getting healthier, I must be getting more energy. If anything, I was exhausting myself, not sleeping properly because I was running too late at night. Or if I couldn't sleep, I'd say, oh, I'll go for a run to tire myself out, not getting a good night's sleep, being exhausted at work the following day, and just looking forward to the run I could go to after work to feel better. So that was like a self care technique that was not self care for me. It was not self serving. And for me, it was coming up with a new strategy or new system that could help me to regulate that emotion, to help me actively recover. So I replaced going for a 30-minute run with a 60-minute walk, preferably in nature. And then being like, okay, I have time to actually process how my day went. I can listen to a podcast. I can listen to an audiobook. I can call a friend. I can go for a walk with a friend. And that was so much more replenishing than going for that 30-minute sprint. And it was about understanding, okay, what are the small, consistent steps rather than looking for the quick fixes or the um, what makes me feel better right now, straight away, rather than the things that have a long term effect. Reconnecting with a friend uh, has a much longer endorphin and serotonin release than going for that 30-minute sprint.
Oh, yes, I totally resonate with that. And your, your outlet, your sort of distraction drug of choice was running. And I think I think mine was it's embarrassing to say, but I think mine was like beautification rituals. It was like the traditional self-care from the perspective of literally just like going and getting like manicures and pedicures and like various beautification self-care things, spa treatments. And I think part of it was just telling myself, yeah, this is what self-care is. This is what the world tells me self-care is. If I scroll on Instagram, it's green juices and spa days. Um, and I think another part of it was just being like, well, I'm making this money, so what's the point if I don't spend it? Like, let me spend it on these lavish things. And the more I got in touch with my burnout and my understanding of the roots of it, the more I started to realize that these were, again, just a distraction drug of a different variant on yours, but fundamentally the same type of thing. And as I started to experiment with other approaches to really rejuvenating myself, I think I landed on the same sorts of things that it sounds like you landed on, which really was things like at the end of the day, or even sometimes in the middle of the day if I needed it, FaceTiming my best friend and just talking about whatever and just laughing. Laughter was incredibly therapeutic. And certainly going on walks became a big part of what I wanted to do. And of course, the first walk that I went on, it felt forced. I felt like, I would rather actually doom scroll on Instagram for an hour, but I'll try to go on a walk. But after you get over that initial hump of experimenting with something new, the barrier to entry is so much, lower than you think it is, and you just don't realize how life-changing that can become over time. I wish there was like a more convincing way to say that, but I absolutely feel that what you're saying in terms of walks can truly change your life. Just going on a walk every day.
Yeah, it's so funny even now because people ask me, and it's especially in working in the office now, um, they're like, oh, what do you do for recovery, or what do you do for this, and they'd be all like aches and pains and exhausted and everything. And if I say like, drink a glass of water, or it's like, hey, let's go out for like a 5 minute walk, maybe do some stretching. And they'd be like, no, what else can I do? And it's like, oh, and I'm like, maybe take a rest day. No, I don't have time for a rest day. It's leg day tomorrow, and I'm like, your body is screaming out for rest. So take a rest day, or just take a slow walk, not steady state or all of these things. Just go for a slow walk in nature with a friend, or take your dog for a walk. That way you won't be sprinting up a hill. And they're like, but what else can I do? And no matter how many things you give them, if they don't say, no, that's not what the answer I was looking for, give me something else. It's like typing to ChatGPT and go like, give me 100 things. And you have a list of 100 things, and they say, no, I don't like any of those. And it always brings me back to me going off on a tangent, in the Fellowship of the Ring, when Frodo's like, to Gandalf, all right then, keep your secrets. And that's the way people react all the time. It's like, if they ask for advice and you tell them something they don't want to hear, that you're not like reflecting back what they want to hear in their echo chamber. And if you're deflecting in any way, they're just going to go, no, that's not the answer you were supposed to give me. No, that's not what I wanted to hear. So I'm not going to take your advice. I'm going to find someone else who tells me what I want to hear.
That is so true. And honestly, guilty as charged for being one of those people in the past. I think I was one of those people who was um, quietly very cynical of the sort of embodied philosophy. I was quietly very cynical that meditation would change my life. I was certainly cynical of the fact that going on walks would really have any significant impact. I believed that it would, make me feel maybe marginally better, but not an order of magnitude better. Um, and, and and so I think that one of the philosophies that I certainly try to practice now is two things. Like one is really catching my cynicism before it sort of can take hold of what I choose to do next. So in any moment where somebody proposes something or suggests something or gives me advice on something, in any moment where I feel that little part of me just viscerally want to resist it, that's when I know that I should pay attention because it's probably reacting uh, you know, without even thinking about it and based off of some sort of bias that I have for how I've already lived my life. People want to be fed back something that affirms that they've been living their life the right way. They don't want to be fed back something that suggests that actually they've been, um, in some ways, living life in a way that is deeply unfair to themselves and is sort of selling themselves short on their potential happiness and enjoyment of life. So I think that's one thing I try to catch is just my cynicism. And the second thing I try to do is just really consciously embrace exploration as a true uh, I guess the philosophy is the word for it. Um, and I think that when people are exploring how they choose to fix whatever problem they're dealing with, especially like mentally, emotionally, they want to choose things that they think they will be able to like ride off into the sunset with long term. They want us to be able to see the destination with certainty. And I found that it's very, very hard to stick to things when you have that mindset. And it's a much more powerful technique to just have this philosophy of ruthlessly experimenting with everything and being willing to just try it for the sake of it. So I, over the past couple of years, have taken many yoga classes. I've done many, writers retreat type things. I've read all sorts of different books, just to understand other people's perspectives. Uh, and that mindset of experimentation, I think, can truly help you find the route that works for you rather than adopting any sort of delay tactic that's waiting for the thing that feels perfectly right. Nothing in life feels perfectly right. Everything in life is found by fumbling and bumbling your way through it, in my opinion.
I love that, and I think it's for me. I've always been geeky and sciencey, so I always loved seeing everything as an experiment, just changing one variable, and then like recording or tracking that for at least 30 days. I mean, like, did that make a change? And that's how a lot of the changes that I did was like it wasn't that I tried something once and go, nope, that's not for me. I'd be like, okay, I'll try something once, it's uncomfortable. Okay, I'm going to try it repeatedly over an extended period, and if I see, okay, this isn't really working for me or this is unsustainable, okay, that didn't work for me, but I tried it. Tried it for 30 days. It's better than me sticking to it for a lifetime hating it or trying it once. It could possibly be good in the long term and being like, oh, I tried it once, it wasn't my thing. Um, with exceptions, of course. Um, like for example, you could try a style of dancing and be like, nope, if I try that a second time, I'm going to break my ankle. Ice skating is another one. I'm like, okay, I went ice skating like 3 times, and I'm like, nope, too many risks of like either losing fingers when I fall by someone else rolling over them, or just falling on my ass. And I was there like, no, I'm going to break my tailbone if I keep doing this to myself. Uh, I'm like 6'4", so when I fall hard. So I was just like, okay, ice skating or rollerblading are not my thing. Um, but it was I can trying them out to be like, is this my thing or is it worth the risk? Um, but yeah, it's being curious is one of my biggest values is, and I feel that that keeps me open minded for a lot of things, and as well also uh, having the curiosity to explore new things. It keeps you open minded to other people's perspectives, to trying new things, and I feel it's like imperative. If you want to grow, you need to be curious about what else is out there. What haven't I tried yet? What could work for me? Rather than blaming everyone else for what's going on around you, what haven't you tried? What could you get help with? What is there that you don't know that you don't know about something? That always confuses me and gets very philosophical. And I'm like, what is it that I don't know about? And I get people to challenge me on that a lot. Um, but I feel that's where a lot of people who feel stuck in a rut need to challenge themselves on the things that, as you said, if you get a visceral feeling to be like, nope, nope, never done that before, and that's not who I am, they're the things you want to challenge. They're the things that you want to say, okay, my body is resisting this for some reason. At least reflect and say, why? Why is it so? Why is it so resistant to the possibility of this happening?
Yeah, I think that all of this sort of this conscious effort to be curious, and I would describe it as a conscious effort because I think some people are naturally curious, and this sounds horrible to say, but I think I have to be consciously curious. Um, I need to like bring it top of mind to force myself to really look and explore in different places. I think that what what it's what we tend to undervalue is how much information you will get by just putting yourself in a different position or place. Like it's the same holds true, physically, in the sense that if you travel to a new place, you will see new things that you just could not have seen because you're looking at it from a different vantage point. And when I think about some of the best decisions of my life that I stumbled into. And I'll give an example of like stumbling into writing and really finding this as sort of a passion of mine and an avenue that I really wanted to pursue. It came about in a non-linear way. It started where I was just kind of curious about videography, and I started making small videos on YouTube, which also, by the way, was something that I felt those pangs of cynicism about when I would go on YouTube and I would scowl at, other people's YouTube channels and say, it's not that good. I can do that. Like that made me know that clearly I wanted this because I think envy and admiration are just two sides of the same coin. Um, and, it started where I was making these videos. And then over time, I started to realize that actually the part that I liked in that was really the storytelling. And what I enjoyed most was like writing sort of the script before actually making the video. I wasn't that into the camera work itself or the editing and post-production. And so that small step in this direction of just trying out videography led me down this path of ultimately realizing that writing was what I was passionate about at the most fundamental levels. And that's what I ended up pursuing more seriously over the next couple of years. But there were many sort of hops in between that. I started a small blog. I sort of changed the focus of that blog. Then I started writing a book, and that's kind of where it's led me today. But all of that was this sort of journey towards fulfillment that began with exploration. And um, and I think those initial steps can be very easy to overlook, which is why you just need to take all of them to the best that you can.
Yeah, even those initial steps, as you said, like for a lot of people, I think it's just a matter of just starting to explore these things. And as you said, starting the blog or starting your YouTube videos, you don't know if you're going to persist or get consistent with it until you start, or get consistent over a short period of time of 30 or 90 days, and then see how you feel, or then reevaluate. Um, where do you think, if people want to explore these things, or let's say, get curious on these things, what's a good starting point for you? Is there, let's say, a reflection that you want them to do, or an action that they can take in order to get that curiosity flowing, and then start one of these habits?
Yeah, I think a big part of it starts with having very honest discussions with yourselves. I personally think that those are best done written down, literally journaling. And I think that the questions that one wants to ask themselves are a few. I think one is, who do I secretly envy? In my case, the answer to that was some writers that I had read the books of. For example, Elizabeth Gilbert. When I read some of her books, all I felt was raging envy for what an incredible writer she was and how much I wanted to be that. So I think one, who do I secretly envy as a starting point for, where your deeper curiosities and longings might lie. Um, I think a second question to ask yourself, maybe slightly related to that, is just what what would I do if I wasn't afraid of failing? Like what would I do if success was guaranteed? And for me, I knew the answer to that was I would write a book if I didn't fear whether or not it would be a New York Times bestseller. Because to your point, I think so much of what stops us is that we don't want to start unless we have guarantees of the fruits of our labor. We want to be guaranteed that the output and the recognition and the return on investment will be worth it. And you just can't start anything meaningful that way. And it also doesn't make the process fun. So just asking yourself, what would I do if kind of fear played no part in it? Um, and then I think the third one to ask yourself or reflect on is just what are the things that I already do? Like what are the things that I already do in my spare time? And perhaps what are the quirky things that my friends notice about me or call out about me? So, for example, if you bake a lot in your spare time, that's kind of interesting. It's kind of not normal. Like you should ask yourself why you do that. And what would it look like to experiment taking that one step further? In my case, my parents used to comment on the fact that I would always write these like pretty extravagant birthday cards for the members of our family. And they were the first ones to sort of say, wow, you really write these lengthy, multi-page birthday cards. Like, you seem to like writing. And I had never put two and two together. I just thought it was a sort of little quirky thing that I had done since I was a kid. But when you really pause and look at some of those things, like what are the quirky things I've done since I was a kid? And what are the ways in which I choose to spend my free time now? Within those often lies a signal of something that you like. So I think starting to try to enumerate what those might be can be a good jumping off point to then say, just for fun, just to pursue it playfully, what would it look like to take this one step further more seriously? And just starting there.
It's literally it's like the first steps of finding your ikigai. That's what I'm kind of gathering from this. So I love that you're who you admire or envy. What would you do if you couldn't fail? And the third one, find what's your passions, the quirky passions especially. I felt you were calling me out for a second on the baking because I used to always do baking as a kid, and that was one thing that followed me. I used to always just like love baking in my free time, and I found that I used to only bake when I was like stressed. So it was stress baking. If I came into work with a lot of cake, they were like, "Well, you must be really stressed right now." And I'm like, yep, I can make a lot of cake, but I know I can't eat it all myself. So I give it to all of my work colleagues. So, and it just became a thing. I was there like, if Eugene's doing a lot of baking, he has a lot on his plate right now.
Oh, we all need our outlets, and as outlets go, I'm very happy to have cupcakes as the sort of outlet of stress.
Sabra, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. And it, do you feel when it comes to let's say the community, speaking about burnout and overwhelm and all this, do you feel like, and we were just talking about this before we came on air, and it was just uh, it was just kind of like itching in the back of my mind recently, and a lot of guests that I've had, that I feel like, am I putting myself in an echo chamber when I'm surrounding myself with so many people who have very similar views on burnout and overwhelm and the state in the workplace? Or like is it that we seek out the people who have similar views, and that we're not talking enough to people who are not even just devil's advocate, but who have differentiating views on how to see burnout and productivity in the workplace, and how we're viewing the changing in leadership?
I mean, I think that, well, I don't think it's an echo chamber from the perspective of, you know, playing back a narrative that isn't widespread. Like, I actually think that this is merely illuminating the fact that so many people feel this and don't talk about it, or think that the best way to navigate handling it is to suppress it. So if it sounds like an echo chamber here, I think that's the best signal of the fact that this is wildly pervasive. I think that the elements of it being an echo chamber could more just be around, are we thinking about all the ways in which battling burnout systemically should be handled? And I would probably tend to sort of advocate for the narrative that a lot of burnout is actually self-driven and in some cases deeply rooted in self-doubt. Um, but that's a reflection of the fact that I was in a company that I felt was largely supportive and that I actually, to this day, very much love and believe in and value the leadership of. But I think other people could strongly disagree with that perspective and would feel more as though the systems of burnout are created and and are mostly defined by the company and by the nature of the business and the leadership. And as with all things, the truth probably exists somewhere in the middle. And I know that we've had different experiences, perhaps on some of those elements. But I think at the largest scale, I think the if there's an echo chamber here, it's only because it is trying to reveal the fact that so many people are feeling this without talking about it. And that's the one thing that I think we are all sort of on a mission to change, which is why we come here to talk to you about it.
I love that reframe because like if someone told me when I first started out that I'd have a burnout echo chamber, I wouldn't have believed them because I started off, I was the only voice in the space I felt. I felt because I was documenting my own experience. And then I started reaching out to people saying, hey, like give yourself some leeway. It's a safe space for you to speak about stress, overwhelm, and burnout in the workplace. And then at the start of this year, hit 100 guests, and I was like, "Oh wow, I've built up a lot of evidence." But for someone to make me feel like this is just an echo chamber, I was like, and thank you for your reframe because it helped me to realize if I had thought 3 years ago that I would feel like the subject of burnout felt like an echo chamber to me, I wouldn't have believed it because no one was talking about this. So I feel in a way that having so many people opening up about it now is a great step in the right direction. Or that people feel that they can open up more in this space. And I really shouldn't be referring to it as an echo chamber, that it should simply be a safe space where people can be vulnerable and open up about how they feel about burnout. That if they feel that their boss is at fault, that they can say that aloud and have someone challenge them on it. That they can say, "Oh, I feel like a failure," and have someone acknowledge and empathize with them and say, look, let's reframe that. Let's see how this can serve you rather than making you feel ashamed. So thank you for that reframe on the burnout echo chamber.
Absolutely, yes. You are not echoing back to yourself on, on four walls. I think everybody that is listening to this, and certainly that was myself as well. We are merely rising up with you in chorus about this issue, and something that we are all through this forum and others putting our heads together on how to best navigate and sort of sharing what's worked for us, which will vary and will depend on different people's circumstances and work environments and personal headspaces. But the fundamental issue remains a very shared experience.